I have these three American speakers, and I would call them public diplomats, who just came back from Donbass area. Certainly, they have a lot to tell you what they have seen, and even to show. So they will have short statements, and after that, they will be happy to answer your questions. And let me introduce the speakers. So the first one is Daniel Kovalik. He is lawyer, human rights scholar, peace activist. Christopher Helali, a member of the Administrative Committee, United National Anti-War Coalition, International Secretary of the Communist Party. And Jackson Hinkle, political commentator, journalist. So, Dan, you have the floor. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to talk about my recent trip to Lugansk, which I just came back from. However, I want to note that in the last year and a half, I've been to Russia 5 times. On one trip, I went to Crimea. I've been to Donetsk twice and to Kherson. So I think I have a good handle on what's happening in some of those, I guess, for lack of a better word, contested areas. But as I said, we just got back from Lugansk, and I think it's important to note that we were hosted both with inside Russia, mainland Russia, and Lugansk by the Union of Political Immigrants and Political Prisoners of Ukraine. That is to say, we were not hosted by the Russian government. We weren't even hosted by Russian citizens. We were hosted the entire time by people who were born in Ukraine, some who emigrated to Russia, some who have stayed within at least what was Ukraine before the SMO. Our main individual who showed us around in Lugansk is a guy named Alexei. He's from Odessa, and he was at the Odessa Trade Union building when, I'm sure all of you know, on May 2nd, 2014. Rightists that were loyal to Kiev burned the building down with people inside it, murdering 48 individuals. If you don't know about that, then I don't know what to say. That event helped spur on the people of Lugansk and Donetsk to seek independence from Ukraine because it was targeted against Russian-speaking people. And they were worried that more violence was to come, and they declared independence after referenda. And this is important to note, by the way. Some experts have properly said that their right to independence is actually even greater than that of Kosovo's, which never did have a referendum. But of course, the West recognizes Kosovo as an independent republic, but does not recognize Donetsk and Lugansk for political reasons, not for any other reason. By the way, Alexei said, he quoted, and I'm forgetting the guy's name. I'm sorry. I believe he was a Protestant minister who said back during World War II in Germany, he said first they came for the communists, then they came for the trade unionists, then they came for the Christians. And Alexei said that's exactly what happened in Ukraine after 2014. They came for the communists, they came for the trade unionists, of course, again, burning down the trade union hall in Odessa, and then they came for the Christians, right? Destroying Orthodox churches, for example, that continue to be loyal to the patriarch in Russia. Again, something not covered very well in the press. None of this is, of course. The press has utterly become a mouthpiece for the State Department on this. In fact, I would say, and I would chastise the press, if I may, I think this is the worst covered conflict I've ever seen in my lifetime. It's frankly a joke, and it's just shame how this has been covered. We visited a mass grave in Lugansk known as the Open Wound. I say a mass grave. I mean, the people are properly buried, but they're buried en masse, and many with many of the people buried are unidentified. These are people that have been exhumed, people killed by the Ukrainian government since 2014. now finally probably given a proper burial in this area, which is also a monument to the dead, to the victims of Ukraine. Sergei Belov accompanied us on this day to that monument. He himself was part of a group that helped exhume over 1,000 bodies of such victims over the years. Of course, it needs to be reiterated because, again, I think the press has forgotten this willfully, that 14,000 people died in the war between Kiev and the Donbass between 2014 and the start of Russia's military operations in February of 2022. That is, before Russia began those operations, 14,000 people already dead in that conflict. And that's a 14,000 people, frankly, that have been largely forgotten because their existence and their deaths is inconvenient to the narrative of the West on this issue. I was happy to meet there. We met with Faina Safinkova. She's a young poet and journalist. She's age 15. She's from Lugansk. She still lives in Lugansk. She's interviewed me a couple times before we met her, so it was nice to meet her. She's been writing since the age of 11 and, of course, has been on the Ukrainian kill list since the age of 12, a great threat to the government in Kiev. She remembers as a young girl the siege of Donbass by Ukraine in 2014, in which water and electricity were cut off for 2 months. She remembers living in her cellar to hide from the shelling by Kiev in 2014 to 2015. You may remember that, in fact, President Poroshenko vowed that while his children in the West would go to schools, the children in the Donbass would spend the rest of their lives in cellars, as she did. Very nice. Her message, I asked her point blank, I said, if you could say anything to Americans, what would you say? She said that this conflict did not start in 2022. It started in 2014. And another inconvenient fact, and she speaks for many people, she welcomed the SMO. She welcomed Russia's intervention in 2022. Wish it had started sooner to protect the people, those 14,000 people who were killed up to that point. We met with Anna Riano, chief of the organizational department of the 150,000-member Trade Union Federation of Lugansk, a union founded after Lugansk became independent in 2014 because it was not very safe to do so before independence. She also said she welcomed Russia's special military operations for the same reason, because she specifically said it was necessary to prevent an imminent invasion which Ukraine was preparing, in which at least some say was 2 or 3 days away by the time the SMO began. And I actually have a couple of nice props for you. I would refer you to this book by a guy named Jacques Baud. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He's from Switzerland. He was a Swiss intelligence officer from the West. And he verifies that that is true, that Ukraine was mounting forces on the border of the Donbass before the special military operations began, preparing for an invasion. And by the way, this is also backed up by the Organization of European Security and Cooperation, which recorded over 2,000 ceasefire violations between Kiev and the Donbass in the weekend before Russia invaded in February of 2022. This was a massive increase in ceasefire violations. Of course, the OESC has, I believe, 57 members, many from the West. The U.S. is on it. And up till recently, at least, it was headed by a German. So it's hardly a pro-Russian organization who said that. What I will say, I want to also just a couple brief observations, then I'll turn over to my colleagues. I was impressed by a few things in Lugansk. First of all, we did not go to the front lines. We were in the cities, and the cities felt fairly calm and normal. A lot of construction is happening there that, frankly, Russia is doing. The main road into the city of Lugansk is built by Russia, brand new road. And every time a building gets shelled, and they continue to be shelled by Kiev, by the way, that's your tax dollars at work. Kiev is shelling civilian buildings, people in Lugansk to this day. We saw some of those buildings. But frankly, as soon as they're shelled, the Russians go in and help start rebuilding, right? And so we saw buildings that were recently shelled, but they had brand new windows that had been put up. So I'd like to compare that to how Israel's going to treat the people of Gaza after they've destroyed 75% of their infrastructure. I am certain, I will just say I'm morally certain after visiting Donetsk and Kherson and Crimea, that the people of those regions will never want to be part of Ukraine again, and frankly should not be. That Ukraine, frankly, gave up its right to those areas when they started murdering their own people there. And in regards to Crimea in particular, which a Ukrainian official recently described the people who live there and have lived there for centuries as occupiers, by the way, very genocidal language. I refer you to a March 18th, 2020 Washington Post article entitled 6 years and $20 billion in Russian investment later, Crimeans are happy with Russian annexation. And that is true. I can guarantee that people of Crimea want to be part of Russia. I know the West doesn't care what they want and is happy to supply arms that murder beachgoers, including children, as happened recently. Can you imagine if Cuba used Russian weapons to murder beachgoers in Miami? But the people there, the people of the Donbass, they'll never go back to Ukraine, not willingly. And that's Kiev's fault. And it's the U.S.'s fault for backing a right-wing regime in Kiev that has Nazi elements in it. Again, a very inconvenient fact. I'll just say, as we move closer and closer to a direct confrontation with Russia, towards nuclear annihilation, which so few seem to care about, this historical reality and the experiences and desires of the people in these regions must be taken into account and respected. And I'll say again, the failure of the U.S. press to properly acknowledge and report on these realities has been nothing less than shameful. Thank you.